I go to Vach, a gesunte winter. This is Gemara in Kiddushin, Daf Nun Vav. Apologies, we didn't get this up before Yontif. We like to dedicate all the learning as an incredible zchus for all the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael that currently are in a matzav of sakana. Psiyata d'shmaya, chenu kol beis Yisrael, Talmud Torah should be the ultimate zchus that everyone should be safe and sound. We pick it up, we're 2 lines from the bottom of Nun Hey Amid Beis, Tanu Ra Banan. Says the Gemara, Ein loichin behema b'ma'is meiser sheni. One is not allowed to buy a behema with the money of meiser sheni. Rashi right away in the end of this Amid comments, Chutz liyerushalayim. He's referring to buying an animal with the money of meiser sheni outside of Yerushalayim. Why? So Rashi keys us in, T'chsev, quoting the pasuk in Devarim, V'sarta kesef yadecha. As the pasuk says, you should literally wrap the money in your hand. And what do you do with it? And you bring it to Yerushalayim. Therefore, you can't use it to buy an animal outside of Yerushalayim. Void, and furthermore, Shema, Tachshish b'teirech haderech. Maybe the animal will be weakened as you travel with it. And therefore, the money itself has to be brought to Yerushalayim and utilized there. And of course, this is money that Meiser Sheni was redeemed with, as we've spoken about. You add on the additional chaymesh for redeeming such Meiser Sheni. And we turn over to Nevav Amid Beis, Nevav Amid Aleph. Says the Gemara, so you shouldn't buy an animal with the money of Meiser Sheni. But v'im lakach, let's say you did, let's say you went and you purchased an animal, b'shoigeg, if it was by mistake, then, or unknowingly, we should say better, as the top Rashi points out. What does it mean that you bought it? B'shoigeg, you did not know, meiser sheni, you did not realize that the money used to purchase a certain animal was meiser sheni money. Yachzuru damim limekayman, the money goes back to its place, to the buyer, and the sale is void. Meaning, you realize after Taive, hey, I just bought a little Betsy over here with $1,000 a meiser. The sale goes back, animal goes back, I take the cash, and I take that cash up to Yerushalayim. B'mezid, let's say one did it unknowingly, b'mezid, purposefully. Ta'alev te'achal b'makit. What's the halacha? He has to bring up the animal and eat it b'makayim, which of course means in the place. What is the place? Of course, that is Yerushalayim, as Rashi points out in the last wide line. As the pasuk says, and you have to eat the animal there. Amar Rav Yehuda says, Rav Yehuda ben Dvar Mamurim. When is this? 3 lines down in Vav Amid Aleph. B'miskavein. This is referring to when one had intent. V'lokach techila l'shem shlamim. And he originally purchased the animal to be a karban, a shlamim. Avo b'miskavein lahoitzi mois meiser sheni lechulin. But let's say his intent was to utilize the meiser sheni money for a non-kadosh usage, for chulin. Then the halacha is being b'shoigeg, being b'meizid, yachzru damim lemekayman. Says Rav Yehuda, if you knowingly, or even unknowingly, but if your kavana was to be maitzi the ma'is lechulin, to remove the kedusha, then the halacha is the sale goes back in all scenarios. Let's just take a moment to short amud. Let's just see Rashi over here. Rashi says, when is this halacha that if it was done b'mezid, you bring up the animal to Yerushalayim? Says Rashi, is only if it's purchased as a shlamim. And Rashi on the second narrow line says, why? Shekach derech kol behemais shenikchais, b'kesef meiser. That is how animals are purchased with the money of meiser to be brought as a shamim. As we learn to the Gemara, we will learn a Gemara menachais. Sham v'zavachta shlamim v'chalta sham. Ubemeiser it says v'chalta sham. But if you did it with the intent to eat it not as a karban, to eat it stam, you went and used the money of meiser sheni, of course, illegally, to purchase an animal for stam usage is not a karban, then the halacha is in all scenarios, it goes back and the sale is void. Asks the Gemara 6 lines down in Vav Amud Aleph, Ve'anantinan. But we learned in our Mishnah, Rav Yehuda Imer says, Rav Yehuda, B'mezid Kiddush. What happens if someone utilizes the money of Meiser Sheni to marry a woman? Kiddush. So the same Rav Yehuda, who's telling us that if you're miskavin, you have intent to use it l'chulin, it doesn't work. He teaches us in our Mishnah that if you've been mezid, went and married a woman, it does work. We have a stira. Answers the Gemara, Amar Rav Elazar, Isha yoidas, she'ein mo'is meiser sheni mischalin al yada. Rav Elazar says there's a fundamental difference between purchasing an animal and marrying a woman. Purchasing an animal, of course, the animal is an animal. But when you marry a woman with the money of Meiser Sheni, she knows that this money has Kedusha. And therefore she's going to go and take the cash. That's why, according to Yehuda, works. Whereas in our case of the behema that you're using for chulin, of course, there's no way, of course, the animal doesn't know, and your whole intent is to use it for chulin, and that's why it will not work. Continues the Gemara, Maskevla Rav Yirmiyah. Asks Rav Yirmiyah, V'rai behema tameya. What about answer Rav Yirmiyah in a case of a behema tameya, avodim v'karkais? In all of these scenarios, if one purchased a not kosher animal, an eved or land, with the money of Meiser Sheni, and in all of these scenarios, says Rav Yirmiyah, the Adam Yodea, person knows Shein Mois Meiser Sheni Meschalin Aleyen. Everyone knows certainly the kedusha of Meiser Sheni doesn't go onto a non-clean animal, not kosher, onto an eved. I should say not kosher. Excuse me. I should say not kosher. That's what it means. Rashi here says. Excuse me. Or an eved or karka. Everyone knows that the kedusha doesn't go on them, and yet Utanan we learned in a Mishnah, Ein leichem beima tamei avodim v'karkais b'mois Meiser Sheni afilu b'Yerushalayim. You can't purchase them, and if you did, v'im lakach. What's the halacha? Yoichal kinegdam. You have to eat the Meiser Sheni in the amount that you used illegally for the other stuff. So we don't say that the seller is going to take the money and eat it b'kedusha. So why are we saying when it comes to the woman that she knows it's not mischalel and she'll eat it in Yerushalayim? Continues the Gemara, 3 lines from the bottom, a fundamental answer again. Elohacha b'isha chaveira askinon. Talking about a woman who's a chaveira. We know a chaver and halacha in Gemara is a Talmud Chacham. Talking about a woman who's a Talmud Chacham, she knows the yada, whereas the seller does not necessarily know, and that's the reason why she will be miskadeshes if Meiser Sheni is used to be as the medium for marriage. Amar Mar continues the Gemara, 2 lines at the bottom of Nevav and Aleph, quoting that which we just said. In the previous brayso, we said, "Im lakach, if you purchased a behema tameya avodim v'karkais, yoichal kinegdon, you have to eat corresponding to them with kedushas Meiser Sheni." Asks the Gemara, "V'amai yachsu damna mekaymim." Why don't we say kihasam? Why don't we say, just like we said in the top of the Hamid, that when Meiser Sheni is done illegally, what do we say? The sale goes back. So why in this case don't we say the same thing, that the sale is void, the money should go back? Explains the Gemara, you're right. Theoretically, we would want that to happen. But Amar Shmuel, says Shmuel, as we turn over to Nenvavim Abeis, we have a problem. The problem is that the seller is nowhere to be found. Kisha Barach, the seller has skipped town. Because the seller has skipped town, there's no way that we could put the sale back. And that's the reason why we're saying that you have to eat kinegdan. Says the Gemara of a time, the Baruch Alei Baruch Kansinan L'Moicher. Sounds like, let's say he didn't run away. What would the halacha be? It sounds like the halacha would be, we would kinas the Moicher. Asks the Gemara, why are we kinasing the Moicher? What did he do wrong? We should purchase, we should kinas the purchaser, because he's the one that spent the Meiser Sheni money illegally. Explains the Gemara, Lav achra ganov, ela chura ganov, a metaphorical term that the mouse is not the ganov, it's the hole. That is the ganov, the enabler to the crime. And in our case, that is going to be the seller. It says Gemara 1 second, Viloy achra, chura, my kavid, the obvious kasha. We have a hole, but without the mouse, nothing's going to happen. So you have a seller, but without the purchaser, nothing happens. Explains the Gemara, Mistavra Kolecha Deika Yisura, Hasam Kansinan. So says the Gemara Yisaid, that wherever the Isser is, that is where we can ask. Because in this case, the seller is the one that has the Isser, he's the one with the Meiser Sheni money, therefore he receives the Kinas. And we continue with the Mishnah on Nunvava Mebeis, continuing with items that one cannot get benefit from them. Hamekadesh, if someone marries Ba'arla, with Arla, fruits of the first 3 years, Beklaya Karen, with Klayim, a mixture of the vineyard, Bishar Haniskal, an animal that's condemned to be stoned, Ubagla Rufa, an animal that has to be decapitated, Bitzi Payir Mitzaira, the birds of a Mitzaira, Bisayir Nazir, the hair of a Nazir, Petachamar, the first-born donkey, Ubasar Bechalav, a mixture of meat and milk, which is forbidden to get benefit from, V'chulin Shenishchatu Ba'azara, Chulin that was shechted in Azara. In all of these cases, the common denominator is, of all these items, as Rashi on the last wide line points out, the Kulu Asiri B'hananinu, as the Gemara is going to explain, the common denominator in all these items is Asr B'hana. The halacha is, because it is Asr B'hana, Einai Mikudeshes, therefore there is no Kiddushin. But what is the halacha? Says the Gemara, if Machran, they are sold, Vikidesh B'dimehem, and someone is Mekadesh and Isha with the money that these items were sold for, then Mikudeshes, then indeed it does work. Says the Gemara, where do we know that all these items are Asr B'hana? Be'arla min alin mirna Be'arla Tanya, we learned to the Raisa, Arelim lo yoichel. Ainli al Isra Achila, Hana Minayin. How do we know you can't even get benefit? Shalo Yana Minano. V'lo Yitzba, but you can't use it to die. V'lo Yalik, but you can't use it to light a Sanera candle. Ta'amaloi Mar, V'alosam, as Arlosay, L'Rabbis, as Kulam. You can't get benefit, you can't die, you can't do any form of benefit from Arla, which of course is the fruit of the first 3 years of a tree. B'klaya Karen, Minolin Amar Chizki Amar Kra. Pen tikdash, pen tukat, says Chizkiah. We learned it out from the fact that the pasuk says pen tikdash, that it might become a kadosh, might become forfeited. Pen tukat ish. From here we take the word tikdash and we split it into two, and it means tukad ish, be burnt by the fire. Rav Ashi Oymar pen ya kadosh, ima kadosh tevis es dama v'yitzel chulin. Something kadosh takes hold and transfer to the money of it, and it itself goes l'chulin. Av klai keller and tovis damav v'yotzi l'chulan. Yotzi l'chulan. So that's a kasha. Asks the Gemara 1 second. If according to Rav Ashi, it's like kodesh, so halacha should be that it should be tovis as damav, but the item itself should not retain its sanctity. Yet we're saying that the klaya karen, the item itself, is indeed forbidden to get benefit from. Says the Gemara, you're right. Excuse me. Elam achavarta kidduchizkia. Number 3, shar and iskal, a shar that's condemned to be stoned. Minayin titania. It says in a brisa, mimash mashanemar, from the fact the pasuk says, Sakli sakal ashar, the shar should be stoned. In yodeh shenavelahi. We don't know that it has a din of an avela, avela asura ba'achila, and you're not allowed to eat it. Matam lamer. In yodeh, is it not obvious that it's a vein you can't eat it? Matam lamer le'ochlas b'sara. Why does the Torah have to explicate that you can't eat the flesh? It teaches you, if you shechted after the din was paskind that the animal has to be stoned, at that moment it's aser ba'achila. That's we know that once it's condemned to be stoned, you're not allowed to eat it anymore, if it was shechted afterwards. Ba'ana minayin, so says the Gemara, very good, but how you know you can't get any benefits from it? The owner of the shar is clean. Says my mashma. Where do we learn from there? So Shimon ben Zayma Omer Kadim Sharmil Chaveroi, like a person tells his friend Yata Plani Nakim in a Chasav, Plani such and such is cleaned out from his possessions, meaning he has nothing left. So to the Bala Shar, the owner of the Shar is Naki, he gets no benefit from this animal. Vainly Bahem Hana Shal Klum Mimai Dahaylo Yoichlas Besara, says the Gemara. Excuse me, and they don't get any benefit at all. Period. Asks the Gemara, how do you know the Torah says don't eat the flesh? He's referring to specifically it was shechted after it was paskined on this shar that has to be killed. Also, that's what the pasuk means. Shari. Maybe if it was shechted after the Gemar din, it's mutter. And what does the Torah mean when it says you can't eat it? It's referring to miskal. Maybe it's referring to when it was stoned hudalsa uched Ravavua, and indeed we have a precedent for this. Ravavua, Amar Rav Elazar, Dam Ravavua, Amar Rav Elazar, Kol Makayim. Anytime the Torah says Shenemar lo yoichal, lo soichal, lo soichlu. Echad Isra Achila, Vechad Isra Hana, Ad Sheipar Lecha Akasav Kidar Sheipar Lecha Benevela, until the Torah explicates like it says by Nevela. So asks the Gemara. So how do we know that if it was shechted la'achar Gemar din, that you can't get benefit from it? Maybe it's only once it was stoned. Explains the Gemara. Hani mili Heichad Denavkol and Isra Achila. That is only when lo yoichal is that which teaches you there is an Isra Achila. But in our case, Hacha, Isra Achila misakal yisakal nafka. We already know you can't eat it from the fact that Torah says it has to be stoned. I know, because if the fact that the Torah says to be stoned is telling you it's also to get benefit, Torah said don't get benefit. Inami lo yoichles besara. Lamali, why would this pasuk be necessary? Avgav de shachte ke'ein basar. Also, that even though you shechted it at a point where it was like it was permitted, you shechted it when? You shechted it before it was stoned. You shechted it after the Gemar din. It still is forbidden. Continues the Gemara, 10 lines to the bottom. First one line is Maskif. Maskif Amar Zucha, still not happy. Ve'imahani mili hechad badak tzur v'shachat ba. Maybe only in a case where you checked a rack and you shechted the animal with a rack. Demechsi kiski law. Then it appears a form of stoning. That's where we would have such a havamina aval. However, in such a scenario, aval shachte b'sakin loi, but maybe it was shachte with a knife, then it would not be also a fascinating havamina. Says the Gemara, midi sakin b'daraisa ksiv. What are you talking about? There's no inherent obligation midaraisa to shecht an animal with a knife. The Torah just says, "V'zavachta," you have to shech the animal. So why would a knife be any different than a stone? So therefore, they both are included in the same isser in our case. And furthermore, the Brisa says, it's an explicit Brisa. You're allowed to shecht with a rack, with a glass, bein bekarmis, with a stalk, shalkanav harid. Says Gemara, that would not be a reason to make a difference. Concludes today's shiur, v'hashta denafkol an isra achila of isra na tervayum layoichal hai balashar naki l'mayasa. So says the Gemara, when all is said and done, we know it's asr to eat. We know it's asr to get benefit. So why does the Torah have to say bal hashar naki? Explains the Gemara, for the added lahanas oiroi, can't even get benefit from the hides of the animal. B'sarai aser v'ayrei mutter. So therefore we need a special pasuk balashar naki. You can't even get benefit from the hide. But 1 second. Ulahanach tanoi demafkalei hay balashar naki lachatzi koifer l'demei v'ladais hanas ayrei minalu. Samachlokes Tanoim, and those that use this pasuk for different dinim. So how do they know you can't get any benefit from the hide of this animal that was stoned? Me'is b'sarai es hatafel b'sarai v'eksha es ve'idach. What does the other mandarmer hold? As we turn over the amud, es loy darish. He doesn't darshan es. We don't have the next amud here. Let's just finish up. Kidditanya, very famous. Brayse Shema Amsuni v'amr l'nechamia Amsuni ayodarish kol esen shabbatayra. Kiv shegia les Hashem lokecha tira. Once you reach the pasuk of Yishafir Hashem Pirush, they stop darshaning because es would seemingly indicate to add on something they have to fear aside for Hashem. Amlo Talmidiv Rebbe. What's going to be with all the S and the Yudarshin? Sounds like you're saying you was wrong. Amr Lahem, the famous line. Kishem shekibalti schar ala drisha. Just like I get schar for darshaning, kachibalti ala prisha. So too, I'll get schar for not darshaning. You have to know when to talk and when to not talk. Sometimes there's schar for giving an extra drasha. Sometimes the schar is by not darshaning. Ad Shabbat Rabbi Kiva V'Limed concludes the Gemara. This was until Rabbi Kiva famously came along and said, Es Hashem Melikecha Tira LeRabbois Talmidei Chachamim. Pick it up from Eglah Aruf on the next year, B'siyata Dishmayo.